running above 20,000 feet isn't, doesn't look like traditional running.
Not running.
Yeah, oftentimes, it's more of like a mental barrier because you feel like you should be so much further ahead, but your body just won't allow you to get there. It feels like you're, moving through molasses. But it's a very humbling experience, and I encourage more people to explore it.
All right, we have Erin Ton joining in from Quito. Erin, thanks so much for taking some time to chat today from all the way down in the Southern Hemisphere.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. I'm a big fan of the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So you obviously know what question is coming next then, and that question is, who is Erin?
I knew this was coming, but it's still such a hard question without getting like super existential. But I'd like to think...
You can go there if you want.
Yeah, I took a number of philosophy classes in college, so that's like where my mind jumps to. But short answer is I'd like to think that Erin is a kind, compassionate, hardworking, and driven person. I care about animals and the environment a lot, and I love challenging myself in high mountains all across the world.
And you are in one of those regions right now, which we're going to dive into more. I've had a handful of conversations with Tyler Andrews, who spent a lot of time down there climbing big mountains. And it's funny, I think he was living in Flagstaff or something like that, which he considered low altitude.
Yeah.
7,000 feet. What elevation are you at right now?
My home base in Quito is at about 9,400 feet. And it's funny you actually bring up Tyler. I was just with him this morning. We were over near Cayambe, which is one of Ecuador's highest volcanoes. And we were trying to climb that along with my partner, Chris Fisher, who's Tyler's main climbing partner, and Ryan Hall, who's a good friend of Tyler's. Long story short, we got shut down because there was a unpredicted snowstorm that like buried some of the crevasses. So we got to go back for that one, but it was a good morning.
I have so many questions about Ryan Hall's current training. I chatted a bit with Sarah and like have so many questions about her own training that I didn't want to spend too much time on Ryan's, but it's fascinating to see what he's doing. This conversation is not about Ryan. We'll jump back over to you. How did running find you, or how did you find running?
Yeah, so I don't have a traditional path into running. I didn't run track or cross country when I was in high school or college. For the majority of my life, I was very academically driven, very studious, straight A student, had to get into an Ivy League school. And then I got there and I was kind of like the little fish, big pond. So I had to find other ways to start differentiating myself and like alleviating some of the stress that comes with like an Ivy League education. So I went to school in upstate New York, and I'd make like weekend backpacking trips up to the Adirondack Mountains and the Catskills. And I co-founded like a backpacking club there with a friend of mine. So that was kind of my entrance into the world of the mountains and like endurance sport. At the time, I didn't really know trail running existed. I graduated in 2020 during COVID and the pandemic and moved back to Colorado. And at the time, my goal was to just finish hiking all the 14ers. But I'd see like people running up and down the mountains with these goofy looking little trail vests. And I was like, what are they doing? And that's when it kind of clicked. Like, I can do these things so much faster and see so much more if I just ran. At the same time, that also corresponded with me downloading Strava and like discovering leaderboards. So it was more of just like a personal competition thing.
It's interesting the way you talked about the navigating the struggle of little fish in a big pond, and how you described that. I was with a group this morning where we were talking about like why do we run? Why do we run trails in particular? And my answer was voluntary suffering or voluntary challenges make the involuntary challenges easier to manage, right? When we choose to do hard things, other hard things that we're forced to do end up not being as hard. How early on did you realize that was true?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's kind of just an innate part of my personality. Like, I've never been the type of person who feels fully satisfied with anything that comes easy. I like the process of, confronting barriers and overcoming challenges. Yeah.
So you saw these people running up 14ers. You were hiking 14ers at the time. What happened next?
Well, I had this local backyard peak just up above Golden in Colorado called Mount Morrison. And that was kind of like my go-to daily training peak. And I'd go there almost every day and just try and shave off seconds or minutes from my previous time until eventually like I got the crown on the leaderboard and like realized what FKTs or fastest known times were. So at that time I kind of just dove headfirst into that world. But
And what was it about the FKT that, like, the racing, not necessarily side by side with someone, but racing like the ghost of somebody who's been there before you? What did you love initially about seeing if you could be the fastest at doing something?
yeah, I think FKTs appealed to me because they're still mostly individual and you can choose which days you feel prime on when the weather is best, but they still involve that competitive element. And I think I've always been like a competitive person in one way or another. Like at one point in my lifetime, it was, the academics, that was my outlet. And now I've found a new place to channel it through athletics.
And so, what is when you're about to hit go on the watch? You're standing there. Are you thinking about how, okay, this is going to hurt? What a privilege it is to do this type of thing. Like, what's going through your head as you get ready to do something really, really hard?
hmm Yeah, I think there is sometimes a little bit of anxiety, knowing the quote unquote pain I'm about to like put myself through. But like as you mentioned earlier, it is that voluntary suffering. And I'm electing to be here and put myself through this situation. And I'm lucky to, have the opportunity to do that. There's a lot of people in this world who don't get to choose their suffering. Yeah.
So you got into FKTs. Another thing you got into was going up the 14ers in high heels. Where did that fun challenge come about?
Yeah, so that tradition originated, I believe it was the end of 2020 when I finished just like hiking all of Colorado's 14ers. And I was pondering ways to celebrate. And I came up with the idea of climbing Mount Elbert in high heels and a dress. It's kind of homage to the fact that that was my first 14er that I ever climbed. So I ended up doing that, and surprisingly, it wasn't as difficult as it sounds. I mean, it sounds pretty ridiculous, but they kind of almost like gave me leverage in a way on the ascent. Like when you think about the physics of it, it's very similar to like the lifts and skis and snowshoes. And I have a younger sister, Hannah, and she wanted to join me for a couple 14ers and high heels as well. So we did like quandary and Bierstadt together and had a great time. So it kind of just became a tradition.
What did other people say as you were going up?
We get a variety of reactions. Some people just like stop and stare, and you can tell they're like processing what their eyes are seeing. A lot of like that's badass. There's a couple people like who see us at the trailheads and dresses and heels and think we're just there to, do a photo shoot and take pictures, and we're like, no, we're going to the summit in heels. On the day that we did Quandary together, we just so happened to pass a reporter who later wrote an article about it, which got a little bit of pushback, mostly from a male audience, saying we're like putting search and rescue teams in danger or that we're just like seeking attention. And I don't think they quite understood like the extent of my background and how many times I've done each of these peaks. And to be completely honest, that lit a fire under me even more just to like say, hey, you know what? I'm going to do all these peaks again, but I'm going to do them in high heels.
So the initial peaks that you mentioned, Quandary, Elbert, etc., those are smooth-ish. I haven't done Bierstadt, but I know Quandary is like 5K up, 5K down, and pretty runnable the whole way until you get to the end, which is like quite steep. And then Elbert, if I recall, was like running through a forest until you get above tree line, and then you're kind of winding up the dirt path. But some of the other ones are just like very sketchy. How did you do that in high heels? And how much slower was it compared to hiking it or running it?
Yeah. So to answer the second question, I think that the high heels actually it brings me down to about the pace of like an average hiker, which is great because I can get out with like my friends and my sister and like still be at their same speed. But yeah, so I'm at 26 14ers in high heels, I believe, including Capital, the Bells, Pyramid,
Wow.
Longs Peak, which are some of the more challenging 14ers in Colorado. And the more technical sections of those peaks actually isn't like the most challenging part with the heels. It's more so like loose scree fields and boulder hopping where I'm more prone to like stubbing a toe or getting blisters. But I feel like it's actually made me more thoughtful and focused with like foot placement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. It's kind of like weighted vest training. When you take off the vest, you feel that much more free and mobile and whatnot. Do you feel that when you put on trail shoes?
For sure. Yeah, the contrast. And yeah, just to clarify, like I only do the ascents in heels. So it's from the trailhead to the summit in
Got
heels.
it.
And then I pack just regular trail runners with me for the descent because that would like destroy your feet on the way down. And I'm not looking to cause permanent damage. But yeah, the moment where I switch from the heels to trail runners on the summit, it's a pretty incredible sensation.
Good segue to talk about your footwear partner, right?
There you go.
You've been with Teva for a couple of years now.
2026 is the start of my second year with them.
Cool. What is it about that shoe that you love, and again, what does it feel like to transition from a high heel to something like that at the top of a summit?
Yeah, so I've loved working with Teva this far. They're relatively new to like, the world of more like rugged mountain running footwear. So I feel really lucky to be getting in with them early and they're super receptive to my feedback. I'm constantly like texting like my athlete manager and the product developers, telling them what I like, what I don't like. So I feel like I have the opportunity to really like create and mold a shoe that works for what I do in the mountains, which is often like off trail, like scrambling up in the high alpine.
They also sponsor Mike Wardian, who's an
Mhm.
athlete I just had on this podcast, and have had many conversations with over the years. And I find him to be particularly motivating and inspiring in his own way. He talks about how he fits training into his life, and he's got a couple of kids and a couple of dogs and a full-time job, and he just like figures it out. And I love that. And I love when brands invest in good people. What's it like to be on a team with with someone like that?
Yeah. Mike has been in the game for a long time. So it's great to know I have like access to someone like that, almost as like a mentor role. And yeah, I've been able to meet him a handful of times and have conversations with him. So yeah, I feel super lucky and fortunate to be on the same team as him.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like he's both accessible and feels like a regular person, but is also like quite exceptional as an athlete,
Mhm.
which is cool and seems to be the vibe of the team.
For sure. He definitely fits the spirit of like the Bureau of Adventure, in emphasizing that it's not all about like podium performances. It's about, getting out there, exploring new environments and having fun. And, he's also very fast and very competitive, both on the roads and on trail.
Yeah. So an early conversation I had on the podcast, I think it must have been episode 6 or 5 or something like that, was with Devin Yanko. And Devin and I were talking, this was in March or April. It was March of 2019. And I was just getting into trail and I was trying to figure out how to make decisions around racing. And I had asked Devin, because she's running races from a mile to 100 miles and literally everything in between. And I was like, how do you decide? And she had a fascinating answer. And I'm curious your take of how do you set goals and how do you put things on the calendar? And then I'll share what Devin said. But I'm curious how you think about goal setting specifically as it relates to, again, you're focused on FKTs versus racing in particular.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that story as well. Because I have some FKTs, that are under an hour, just an hour, 2 hours of like redlining. How fast can I run up and down a 13er or a 14er? And then others that are 24 plus hours to multi-day efforts. And I feel like it boils down to what inspires me in that moment. I think it's normal for like humans to go through phases in life, but I think that relates to like how we keep this sustainable. And, ultimately, like if your mind isn't in it and you're not motivated by it, inspired by it, having fun, like you're not going to want to do it and put your best out there. So there are like a handful of, races I do aspire to compete in the future, but for the time being, I'm really motivated by like big mountain projects. So like peak lists, ridge link ups, how fast can I run these very high altitude peaks?
Yeah, it's pretty similar to what Devin said. It was more of like, think of what's fun and kind of chase that. Is a 50K fun? Is a 100-mile fun? Is a marathon? Like what is firing you up in that moment? I'm curious more of like, for you, how do you find motivation to get after it and climb the peaks? And like, what is enabling you to put one foot in front of the other and train hard at these high altitudes?
Yeah, for me, ultimately, I think it comes down to like exploration, and that means both an exploration of natural landscapes, and I like challenging myself in a diversity of landscapes. So, some of my FKTs range from like the Himalayas to Patagonia to the desert in Utah. And then, yeah, also like an exploration of what my physical and mental capabilities are in those environments.
Why do you think that that's what lights the fire for you? Like finding out how far you can go or how fast you can go?
Um, I think that could just be like an intrinsic personality trait. I've always been like a very curious person in one way or another, and I always want to know, what's around the corner, like am I able to connect these peaks via that ridge line? Will it go? Will it not? So yeah, like one of my long-term projects, for example, is finishing all the 13ers in Colorado. There's over 600 and I'm maybe, I don't know, 250, 300 of the way through. And, those aren't the most like competitive FKTs, but that's a really fun like side project to get out there, off trail and just explore.
So you do a lot of high altitude stuff, which I would define as, I don't know, above 9 or 10,000 feet. Have you always been able to excel at high altitude? Are there components of your day to day that you feel are contributing to your ability to push at these higher altitudes? I mean, you're sleeping at 9,400 feet right now. I feel like that probably helps. But what's enabling you to do that? And the reason I ask is so many people love doing these high alpine adventures and don't know how to prepare properly for them.
Yeah, that's a good question that I've wondered about myself. I'm from Colorado originally, so there's definitely an element of that contributes. But there have also been times, like, for example, like my most recent season in the Himalayas, I was down in Tennessee prior to that because my partner, Chris, he was running the Barkley marathons. And so like I had been down at, practically sea level for a while. And then, I go up to, living at like 15,000 feet at Amadou Blanc Base Camp in the span of a week. And it doesn't feel good. We call it like the rip the band-aid off method. And Tyler can attest to that as well. But it is possible, and I think people are capable of more than they think. Last year, I actually helped guide one of Tyler's expeditions in the Atacama Desert of Chile. And we were able to bring some clients all the way from sea level up to 6,000 meters in the span of the week, which was really cool. And, they didn't feel good by any means, but it was really awesome to be a part of their journey and like overcoming, their mental barriers.
What does that look like?
A lot of patience. um, yeah, and encouragement and relating to the fact that it doesn't feel good for any of us, even like as like high performing elite athletes.
Yeah, the high alpine stuff it's an experience that you don't really understand until you understand it, right? The first time I did a 14er, I was living in Breckenridge and sleeping at 9,600 feet, and the feeling of moving a mile an hour at 13,000 feet and just like being totally wasted, like all out effort while going a mile an hour was just like a bonkers feeling. And it, you can't really do anything besides just keep moving forward and hydrating and doing all the things. But yeah, it's such a cool but bizarre experience.
Yeah, it's very humbling. And I think one of the other contributors, when I'm in Colorado, is I also live in a van like the majority of the time. So like when I'm training for high altitude objectives, oftentimes I'll drive up to the top of like Independence Pass or Cottonwood Pass and sleep at like 12,000 feet, which definitely contributes. But it is, a fine balance between like, your body recovers faster when you're at lower altitudes. And so, train high, sleep low. Yeah, vice versa.
Have you ever slept at the top of Mount Evans or Pikes Peak? Can you?
Um, I have never personally. I don't know if you're allowed to or not. I would,
Probably not.
yeah.
Probably not Pikes Peak. Yeah, that's a good point that you can get up pretty high by car or van. What are some tips you have for someone who's curious about doing higher altitude adventures? Like what should they be thinking about that they're not thinking about?
Yeah, I would say like temper your expectations, especially when, you start getting into the world of like international high altitude mountain objectives, like running above 20,000 feet isn't, doesn't look like traditional running.
It's not
And
running.
yeah, oftentimes, it's more of like a mental barrier because you feel like you should be so much further ahead, but your body just won't allow you to get there. It feels like you're, moving through molasses. But it's a very humbling experience, and I encourage more people to explore it.
How does that show up in other parts of life? How do these high alpine adventures benefit you outside of running and climbing?
I think that in the past couple of years, through all of this travel, it's really broadened my perspective on the world. Like, even outside of like the mountains and athletics, I really enjoy like the cultural elements of travel and like seeing how other people around the world live, seeing how the Sherpas and the Khumbu Valley of Nepal live and how they don't like have access to a lot of resources, but they're some of like the happiest people you'll ever meet in the entire world. And I've definitely like taken a lot of messages from that for like my own life.
They're out there just touching grass constantly.
Yep, very connected with the earth.
That's the secret. Yeah, we just all need to spend more time outdoors. Going back to the conversations I've had with Mike, he shared many similar feelings around like the experiences that he got to have and he got to share with his kids and bringing them to they've been to like I don't know 50 countries or something crazy like that before they were 18. What are some of the places that surprised you the most that either they weren't what you were expecting or you had a really cool connection with a certain culture or group of people, and where did those interactions take place?
Well, the first one that comes to mind as far as like places that surprised me and just blew me away is the Atacama Desert in Chile. It's like super remote. It's home to Ojos del Salado, which is the highest volcano in the world. It's about like 22,600 feet, and it's a long journey to get there. You fly into, well, most of the time you fly into Santiago first, and from there, a small town called Copiapó. And yeah, I guess like a lot of people would say it's like a third world like city. And so like just running through there with like my nice shoes and trail vest, it's kind of like, yeah, a weird and uncomfortable sensation that definitely gets you thinking. And just like the contrast between like, yeah, having the ability to like go out and do this and the other people there who don't, and they still like stop to like give you directions and things. And yeah, it's something that I don't necessarily like have answers or solutions for, but it certainly widens your scope.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things about travel is understanding just like how, despite being different or we have different traditions or whatnot, like we're all pretty similar in some sense of it. And people who are able to travel have this ability to understand how different people do different things. And I don't know, there's so much like conflict in the world. And I personally think that if people traveled more and met more people that were not like them, they would not feel so threatened by people who are different or anything like that. I'm curious if you've felt that firsthand of meeting people from different cultures and seeing people who have a very different quality of life or beliefs or perspectives or something like that, and then like being able to find some aspect of connection with them despite all of that.
For sure. Yeah, like I have received like a little bit of pushback from, like friends and family members in the States, questioning me traveling to, places in like South America and like Mexico. But the more you do it, obviously you have to like, maintain like caution, but like you realize we're all just the same at the end of the day. And like we all ultimately have the same values. And yeah, like Mexico, like Pico de Orizaba, going for the FKT on that one. That's like a perfect example. I went and lived in like this local village, like very small, not a lot of resources, right at the base of the mountain. And I only speak un poquito de español. But just trying my best to like communicate with them, and they didn't speak any English, and that was a really cool experience.
What tips do you have for people while traveling based on what you've experienced? Like how do you be a better steward of like being a better visitor? Like I did a podcast with the tourism director of Leadville, and we talked a lot about like how to be a good visitor to Leadville. So I'm curious your perspective on how to be a good visitor to South America or Mexico or some of these other places that you've been, whether it's Nepal or basically like mountain villages and mountain towns. How are you a better visitor in those places?
Mhm.
How can you be? Sorry, I've talked a lot today. I led like a discussion for a brand this morning, and it was a very in-depth conversation. So I'm quite out of words,
All
but
good.
I think I got my point across.
Yeah, I've been up since 3 a.m. this morning, so apologies
Got
if
it.
it's not all clicking. But yeah, I think it's critical to maintain an open mind, and the more adaptable you are, the better that will translate into like a good experience when traveling. I've often found, like, whether I'm traveling internationally or in my van all across, the states, that it's better to like stay in one place for a longer period of time and really immerse yourself in the local community versus just like constantly hopping back and forth, which, obviously people have like job requirements that limit them sometimes, but the more you can immerse yourself with the people and the culture in a place, I think the better experience you're going to have, which is also one of the reasons that I really love FKTs. And, doing them all across the states and the world, is I feel like I've gotten to, like figure out which trails are really important to people in a, specific state or city and like get to know them versus like if I followed more of the traditional path and just raced ultras all the time, I probably wouldn't have that same experience.
Yeah, talk more about the FKT piece. You have, as you said, about 170 FKTs, maybe 180, pending some more being accepted. What is it about that is lighting your fire? And if someone's curious about going more down that rabbit hole, like where can they learn more?
Yeah, so you can go to the FKT website. I think it's just fastestknowntime.com. And it's a really good resource to use, even if you're not trying to approach these routes from like a competitive stance. If you're like going to a new place, just going on there and browsing which, trails are like significant and meaningful to the people there, that'll give you a good idea of what you should run. But yeah, what appeals to me about FKTs is they're like a puzzle almost. And I really love the feeling of going out and oftentimes repeating a route over and over and over again and becoming an expert on that specific route. And some routes are like open course where it's just the fastest from the bottom to the top. Others are more closed course where you do have to like stay on the trail. Obviously, we all heard about like the Michelino Grand Teton situation this summer.
That was the one where he was pardoned by Trump.
It was. Nobody saw that coming.
Wasn't on my 2025 bingo card to see a trail runner being pardoned. Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. You mentioned that there were some races that you wanted to chase. What is it about those specific races that interests you?
Yeah, so like some of the ones that are top of mind are like Hard Rock and Ure 100. I think my strength as a trail runner is definitely on like steep, more techy terrain at high altitudes, and like the more vert, the better for me. So those are just a couple examples.
For those who aren't familiar with those races, many people are familiar with Hard Rock, which is about 40,000 feet of gain, and Ure has more gain and is in a similar place. The course cutoff for Ure is something like 52 hours for the 100. And I think Hard Rock is in the 50s as well. Is that correct?
It sounds about right. Yeah.
I paced at the Ure 100 in 2021, and it took us
Cool.
7.5 hours to go 12 miles. And we climbed 4,000 feet in 4 miles as part of that. I was just like, this is not trail running. We are walking and hiking. Shout out to Kelly Young. That was a wonderful day.
Awesome. Yeah, and the San Juan Mountains are just like spectacular. They're hands down like my favorite mountain range in Colorado. So any opportunity to get down there, up there, as I should say, is a good one.
Yeah, they call it the Switzerland of the Americas, and rightfully so. It's absolutely stunning, and it's one of those places that you just like you can't believe it's real, even when you're in it. The town of Ure, you have mountains 360 degrees around you, and it's just stunning.
Yeah, especially during like peak wildflower season in the summer, or like in the fall, once all the aspen leaves start turning that gold, it's unreal.
All roads lead back to this podcast needing to be partnered with the Colorado Board of Tourism. So if anyone out there is listening, that's a connection, two of them. We are out here singing your praises, Colorado. One thing that I think a lot of people have challenges as it relates to trail running and hiking is like the fear of being really off trail or really out there. How do you deal with that? And I'm asking personally, like I'm afraid of wildlife, and I'm curious how you think about that, and what you would say to someone who's like wanting to get out there more, but kind of has these, decently reasonable fears of all the things that exist out there.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's something that comes with a lot of time and experience. So like when I started my journey of just hiking the 14ers, the majority of the time I would go with like my sister or friends. And then, as you begin to like develop more experience, you learn kind of how to read the mountains and read ridge lines. And so something that was like really helped me was my goal of finishing all the Centennial peaks in Colorado, or like the 100 highest. And that became a goal of mine after the 14ers. And with a lot of those peaks and the 13ers, there's not a trail the majority of the time. So you really have to, do your research and test your route finding and navigation skills. And over time, it becomes a lot easier.
I want to give a shout out to a couple of resources that I think are helpful as well for women who are looking to get out there. Trail Sisters, have you done anything with them? Are you familiar with what Gina and that crew has done?
I'm familiar with the organization. I haven't done anything with them yet, but yeah, I think it's awesome what they're doing.
Yeah, it's a cool one. They have a lot of groups in Colorado and the Mountain West where women who want to get out there with other women, they have meetups, and they do it at 6 a.m. or weekends or all sorts of different times. And then a previous partner of the podcast, Goes Health, is an app that helps with offline triaging of, let's say you feel bad, or let's say something happens. It can help you understand the magnitude of what's going on and like how important it is to get off the mountain immediately, or if you can change your nutrition to resolve resolve what's going on. So a couple of resources, one digital and one more community based.
That's awesome. Yeah, to answer like the part of your question about the wildlife, like, I've encountered like moose, a couple bear out there. But I think like for me, like it's worth like taking those risks versus like not going out there at all.
Yeah, that's kind of where I've gotten to with it. I'm even afraid of cows, and like even this morning, I ran past 30 cows here in Boulder, and the more, to your point, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with doing it, and it's just muscle memory and repetitions.
Mm-hmm.
You said you woke up at 3 a.m. today. You were doing an epic jaunt up a volcano, it sounds like.
Well, we were attempting to. The weather
Right.
conditions shut us down pretty early. It was like actively snowing on us, so like all of our tracks were immediately getting buried, and we couldn't see like where the crevasses were and if there was like a snow bridge on top. So yeah, we decided to flip around, and I'm in Ecuador for a while, so I can always head back over to Cayambe, but that's just part of like playing in the mountains. And sometimes you roll the dice and it pans out. The other day I had a great day on Cotopaxi, beautiful weather, even though like I was uncertain going into it. And then today it was like the opposite. So that's just how it goes.
How do you know when to call it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have turned around on mountains numerous times. Majority of the time it's because of weather conditions. Like that's not something I'm willing to risk my life over, and it's certainly made like my mom back home a lot more comfortable knowing that I can put my ego to the side and turn around, and the mountain will always be there. There have been a couple times, like for bigger projects, like for example, a couple summers ago, I climbed all the Colorado 14ers self-supported, and was trying to do that in a consolidated effort. So I did take, a few more gambles on some of those peaks than I normally would.
So you're able to do all of this in a full-time capacity, right? What's making that possible? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate enough to work with a couple sponsors, Teva, now supplements, who support me, and I'm able to make a comfortable living, like traveling and adventuring, which like it doesn't get much better than that. Like, I can say I'm a professional adventurer. But for a couple of years it was certainly a grind. And yeah, like after I graduated, my intentions were to take one gap year and then go to law school, and that got protracted, and as I dove like headfirst into trail running. So yeah, now I'm finally able to say after like 5 years that I'm in a much more comfortable place.
What was that process like? I did a podcast a few weeks ago with Kelly Newland, who we talked through how to get sponsored and why would someone want to get sponsored and what that means. We're here at the beginning of January, and there's a lot of turnover in brand partnerships this time of year, new partnerships, brands leaving or stopping working with athletes, et cetera. Like what did that 5-year journey look like for you? And can you speak to that, knowing that many people think it's a much faster process?
Hmm. Yeah, no, those 5 years were definitely filled with a lot of doubts and uncertainties. I think the only reason I got through that was because I had confidence in like my skills and my ability and my potential. And also just that this was the path that was going to make me feel the happiest and most fulfilled. There's certainly an element of like fear and anxiety that comes anytime you opt to take more of an untraditional path. Like I mentioned, I followed a very linear academically driven path for the majority of my life. And so, I definitely did fall into the comparison trap of like, my friends from college getting all these, nice fancy jobs in Wall Street. And here I am just like sleeping in the back of my car and running mountains every day, being a dirt bag. But like at the end of the day, that's like what makes me the happiest, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. I quit my job in June of last year to go full time on content and running and brand partnerships and this kind of stuff. And some of it is like, well, what if this all goes away? And, like my biggest partner didn't renew for 2026. And like that partner was a large piece of like how I pay my bills and how I pay for the production of the podcast. But to your point, it's just kind of like I have confidence that I'll figure it out, and the ability to have the freedom of like how I structure my day is worth it to me. The balance of that risk versus the reward of like, to me, true wealth is like the ability to say yes to whatever you want whenever you want, and have that sense of control of how you spend your time. Like to me, it's all about the pursuit of time, and freedom is like the ability to choose how you spend your time. Like this morning, I spent 2 hours running trails and then 2 hours talking about trail running gear in leading a market research project for a brand. And I'm doing the same thing again tomorrow. And like, I didn't need to take PTO for it. I didn't need to ask anyone for permission. And I was reflecting on that as I was going to bed last night, that like, I don't have to feel bad about taking time off, quote unquote, for doing something like that. And it made me really proud of like taking that risk and taking that leap. And so it's cool whenever I hear someone talking about how they did that themselves and how they bet on themselves. And I just love when people are so gung ho about something that they're willing to take risks to make that thing their reality.
Yeah, I think the freedom element you mentioned is like critical, and like so often in our like society we're chasing this elusive idea of like comfort, but it's like, what does comfort actually mean? You know, is it having this nice house with a big paycheck? Or is it like, you know, having the time and freedom to go out there and do what you want, and place yourself in these like, you know, quote unquote uncomfortable situations that are in turn going to make you grow and challenge yourself and like learn, which is like the whole point of life, right?
Totally. Yeah. And to that point, like if you look at who the largest participating group of ultra endurance or endurance events, specifically like marathons and Ironman triathlons, it's like executives who are not challenged enough in their day to day for some reason, and they're making a lot of money, and they crave discomfort and they crave the lack of predictability. There was an Outside Magazine article a few years ago that like wrote all about this and this phenomenon of why a fast marathon time is the new status symbol on Wall Street. And it's just like this crazy counterintuitive if you're not in the community. Like if you're not a runner, you don't really understand it. But if you are a runner, you're like, yeah, that makes sense to me. And it's just really cool way is to your point, like comfort is a fallacy. I don't think we should be chasing comfort, assuming we have a roof over our head, we have food on our table, etc.
Right.
Like you need this like the staples for survival. And outside of that, like it is such a luxury to chase discomfort that those who can should.
I
In my
agree.
opinion.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so what discomfort are you currently chasing? What's the top of your list right now?
Yeah, so I'm currently in Quito, Ecuador. I'll be here for the next couple weeks. It's a perfect high altitude training base, with access to like Cotopaxi, Cayambe, Chimborazo. So I'll be hoping to put some speed efforts up on those guys. And that's all a lead up to Aconcagua, which is the highest peak in South America, where I'll be attempting the women's speed record on that here in about a month.
And Tyler did that 2 years ago also?
He's been down there a couple seasons. Yeah, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago.
Aconcagua specifically, right?
Yeah, well, there's a short record on Aconcagua that starts at the base camp and runs to the summit and back down. And I think he did that one last year. And there's also a long record that's pretty historic. Like Carl Eigloff has done it before, Kilian Jornet. And that one starts at the nearest road, runs all the way to the summit and back down in like 40 miles with quite a significant amount of like altitude change all the way up to 23,000 feet.
Wow. Amazing. Well, we will be rooting for you. This episode will probably come out around that time or before. So if people have tuned in and they've made it this far, where can people find you if they want to follow along with your adventures?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram and Strava. Both are just my name, Erin Ton. Or you can keep up on fastestknowntime.com and see when I post new FKTs.
Awesome. Erin, appreciate the chat, and we'll see you out there.
Thanks, Jonathan. I hope to see you in the mountains.
Yes, please. In Colorado. I don't know if I have any plans to come to South America anytime soon, but hopefully one day.
Yeah, we should get together for some 13ers or 14ers sometime.
Sounds like a plan. You'll have to wear the high heels so I can keep up.
Perfect.
Cool. Thanks, Erin.